Hey guys, what's up? Zyflin here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about who I believe to be the top 5 best beginner Warframes for a newer player, of course. So, not to waste any time, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into this. The first Warframe that I recommend picking up as a newer player is Rhino. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be using Rhino Prime as a demonstration, but it's important to know as a newer player, the difference between a regular version of a frame and a Prime Warframe is not that big, right? There's a few minor stat differences, such as let's say maximum energy capacity or slightly more armor and stuff like that. Nothing major which is going to change up how your Warframe is modded or built at the end of the day, right? So Rhino is a really good beginner Warframe because he excels at a few things that a lot of beginner players struggle with, which is survivability and dealing damage, right? So his second ability is called Iron Skin, and this allows you to equip Iron Skin, which allows you to absorb damage. Then this absorbed damage is turned into more damage absorption, which just allows you to soak up a bunch of damage from a ton of enemies, right? So if I had just a group of enemies that were shooting at me, I would go ahead, press my second ability. Then I would have a brief period of invulnerability. Then this brief period of invulnerability would soak up all of that damage and give me more invulnerability for, a certain amount of damage dealt to me. So it's a really nice sort of like scaling survivability ability, which is just going to basically allow you to get through the entire star chart and even more difficult content, no problem. His third ability, Roar, is probably one of the best damage buffing abilities in the game. You're going to see this used a lot whenever someone is trying to enhance, like let's say the amount of elemental damage that they deal, for example. It is just one of the best damage buffing abilities in the game. There's no other way to put it, right? All you have to do is press the third ability and there you go. You have a damage buff which lasts a pretty long time. So this is just going to solve two of those problems which a lot of players, whenever they're new to the game, just struggle with straight up. His fourth ability as well is a crowd control ability where you just stump the ground and enemies, whenever they're caught in the blast, they just sort of like fall in the air, which lets you go ahead and just, shoot at them and deal damage to them. So a really good kit for a newer player, and you can pick Rhino up as early as Venus on the star chart. So that's the normal version, of course. All you have to do is kill the boss Fosa, or not the boss Fosa, but kill the boss called the Jackal on Fosa multiple times to get the part blueprints, then craft those parts in your foundry, get the blueprint for Rhino from the market, and then just go ahead, whack it all together, and then within 3 or 4 days, you're going to go ahead and have your very first, built Warframe, which is going to be Rhino, because it's just a great all-around Warframe. So, moving on, the next Warframe that I recommend picking up is going to be a controversial pick for a lot of people, I know, but this frame just makes the game so easy and speeds the game up so much, and it is going to be Nova. So again, I'm using Nova Prime. There's no massive difference between regular Nova and Nova Prime, like mentioned at the beginning of the video. But Nova's kit is really insane because of her fourth ability. Now, I have her first ability changed off because her first ability isn't really anything to write the home about. It's kind of meh. It does give you, I think, damage reduction, but it's nothing too crazy. Rhino's definitely a lot better, putting it that way. But her fourth ability allows you to slow enemies down. So if I just go ahead and I unpause these enemies here, what we can do is we can just go ahead, hit the fourth ability, and then these enemies, their movement speed is going to be slowed down by 75%. So obviously, this is amazing for just keeping you alive and also, just enabling you to deal a bunch of damage to the enemies, So really great frame for just keeping you alive. On top of that, you also have a massive AoE damage dealing ability, this little antimatter ball here. That's your second. So you go ahead and you shoot at it, and then you can guide it with your crosshair into the enemies, and what's going to happen is it's just going to explode whenever it hits the ground and deal damage to all of the enemies around. So I went ahead and died there, but that's because I'm not focusing too much on what the bad guys are doing. But on top of that, she also has an insane movement ability. And remember, whenever you're playing Warframe, you're going to be farming items repeatedly, right? So doing the same missions over and over and over and over again. So her third ability is called Wormhole, which just allows you to teleport from point A to point B just by looking at it, right? So you look, you press free, you walk into the portal, and then there you go. You've just TP'd. So really great for just getting free missions super fast. And that is basically Nova's kit summed up in a nutshell. She is an insane frame for just slowing down enemies, making them vulnerable to, you know, getting shot at. And then the second ability is great damage. The third ability is great for maneuvering. And the first ability is just okay for keeping you alive and dealing a tiny bit of damage to enemies. But moving on from Nova, next up we have Mesa. So again, this is going to be a controversial pick in the comment section below for the simple fact that you get Mesa quite late into the game. You can get her whenever you visit Eris. And what you have to do is you have to do a quest called the Patient Zero quest, right? So this quest is going to allow you to then farm up Mutilus Alad nav coordinates, and you have to craft a key to go ahead and kill a boss to farm Mesa. So it sounds really complicated, but it's quite simple. I cover it all in my previous series of beginner guide, so you can just go ahead and check that there out if you're struggling with the game at all. But Mesa is just an absolutely insane frame because her second ability is a damage buff and a crowd control 2-in-1. Her third ability is a damage reduction. Her fourth ability is insane for killing enemies. I'm just going to go ahead and pause the enemies though, just so I don't make a fool of myself and die again. We're going to spawn these enemies in. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and press her fourth ability, hold down left click. You can see these guys are level 180 and they die phenomenally fast, right? They die so quickly, it's insane. So this frame makes so much content in the game super easy that she is just a no-brainer to pick up. I recommend using her a lot whenever you're doing the likes of bounties in the open worlds, right? Because, you know, they're big, wide, open areas. There's lots of enemies spawning in. And all you have to do is jump into the air, press 4, hold left click, and then look around yourself. And a lot of enemies are just going to die from that simple process alone. And of course, you have the damage buff. You've got the damage reduction. So keeping yourself alive and dealing more damage is easy peasy with Mesa. Her first ability is kind of meh, so I went ahead and I replaced it with another Warframes ability, but we're not going to cover that in this video because that's just a little bit too complicated for, you know, someone who's just trying to get into the game. But the first ability is essentially just the damage buff as well, but it's just not as good as the second one. Maybe in terms of damage, it is good, but it's inconsistent, if you get what I mean. So moving on, next up we have Saryn. So again, another controversial pick because you can only get her on the last planet, but I still consider players who have just finished the last planet to be beginner players because there's so much more to Warframe than just the star chart, you know? Saryn is one of those Warframes that just enables you to do so much. She is super versatile. She has great survivability. She has great damage buffing. She has great AoE damage, and she just allows you to do so much, right? She's mainly used for farming focus in a game mode called Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. And the reason being is because what you can do with Saryn is you can cast these spores onto a single enemy. That you cast your third ability, which is a toxin damage buff. You shoot the enemy which has the spores, and then these spores are going to spread to other enemies, and they scale up in the amount of damage that they deal. So you can kill a ton of enemies like really fast as soon as they spawn in with Saryn just by using this spores ability alone. On top of that, your fourth ability is a nuke. Now, this is insanely strong for farming XP to Saryn, and there is a mechanic later on in the game called Focus, which you have to get a lot of XP coming to your Warframe to get a lot of focus, right? And by using these abilities to kill a ton of enemies, you're getting a lot of focus in a very short period of time, and she's just really a no-brainer to pick up. On top of that, she can speed up missions like defense missions. She can make survival missions really easy, mobile defense missions really easy, anything like that. Like, she just trivializes so much content in the game. And like I said, super versatile. You can make damage buffing builds which let you equip like free damage buffing abilities, and you can just deal nasty damage with your weapons by using Saryn as well. So she is just a no-brainer frame to pick up as well. She's phenomenal in the amount that she enables you to do. So last but not least, we have Nezha. Now, the reason that Nezha is on this list is for the simple fact that he is good at doing things fast, he is good at surviving, and on top of that, he is knockdown immune. And the reason that knockdown immunity is super important is because the current meta, quote unquote, in Warframe is to use explosive weapons, right? So a weapon that you're probably gonna hear a lot about is the Kuvazar or the Kuva Brahma, right? Both of those are explosive weapons, and normally what we would do is we would use a mod called Prime Sure Footed to make it so that we don't get knocked down, right? So it's a 100% chance to resist knockdown. If you do not have Prime Sure Footed, and you shoot a explosive weapon at your feet, you're gonna get knocked over and it's gonna look a little bit like that, right? But with Nezha, with his his third ability equipped, you are knockdown immune. His first ability is a movement speed buff, which I don't have equipped right now because I can go through missions really fast without it. But his first ability is a movement speed buff. His second ability is a hula hoop, which you can teleport to, which is really insane, just kind of like Nova's third ability. And his fourth ability is a crowd control, kind of like Rhino's. His third ability is also kind of like Rhino's Iron Skin. In fact, it's almost the exact same, and it just allows you to like absorb that damage, and then the damage that gets absorbed, you then absorb even more on top of that, right? So absolutely crazy frame for just getting things done. And here is the crowd control in effect. You can throw your hula hoop and that is going to bounce between these enemies, and then whenever you kill these enemies, there is additional chance for them to drop the likes of health orbs and stuff like that, right? So really fun frame for just keeping yourself alive, going through missions really fast, making yourself knockdown immune, and enabling you to use weapons such as the Kuvazar and the Kuva Brahma without having to have logged in for like 400 days or whatever the number is to get the likes of Prime Sure-Footed, because it is a login reward, unfortunately. And there's no other way to obtain Prime Sure-Footed in the game. Moving on to the honorable mentions. First up, we have Banshee. Now, Banshee, the same as Nezha, you get them from a clan's Tenno lab. So in their dojo, you have to go there and then replicate the blueprints like that. But Banshee is just one of those frames that she is really glass cannony, right? So she will die really easy, but the amount of damage that you can deal with her second ability and the fact that you can crowd control a ton of enemies with her third ability is what makes her pretty nutty, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to spawn in a bunch of enemies, right? Well, there's actually already a bunch spawned in. We're going to go ahead and cast our third ability, right? Or not our third ability, our second ability. Our second ability is going to paint these like little targets onto the bad guys, and if you shoot these little targets, you're going to deal increased damage, which is really, really, really nice, right? So that on its own is great, but you can actually stack these up, right? You can have multiple on the enemy, so it's just a matter of you just cruising around and shooting at bad guys and getting like a damage buff applied to the majority of your shots, which is super nice. Now her third ability, which is why I keep on mixing the two up, her third ability is actually a crowd control, which allows you to basically give the enemies a headache, right? And whenever that headache ends, you run away from them, you go towards them again, and the headache starts back, right? So you're not modding for a lot of range on Banshee just because of this crowd control ability, but it allows you to have one of the best like crowd controls in the game, because it just stops what the enemy is doing and gives them that headache, and it just basically incapacitates them. I don't think that's the right word, but it stuns them, right? They can't do anything when your third ability is up and they're affected by it. On top of that, you can use other abilities from other Warframes to slow these enemies down, and there you go. Like, they're, you know, stunned for a way longer time now, which is great. Awesome, amazing, right? So Banshee, super great frame. You're going to be using her a lot to deal with enemies such as Kuvaliches and the Sisters of Parvos, which have, you know, a lot of damage reduction and resistances and whatnot. And just by casting Sonar, her second ability, that is going to allow you to just, you know, rip through all those defenses that those enemies have and deal a ton of damage to them, and probably, most likely, one-shot them. That's how good Banshee is. Now, moving on, we have Vault. Now, Vault is one of the starter Warframes in the game. He is super versatile, so much so to the point that I actually have 3 Vaults because, you know, different builds and whatnot. But he's versatile in the sense that he can kind of do what Saryn does, right? He can buff up your damage of your weapons. He can, you know, kill a lot of enemies in a short space of time. And on top of that, he's really good for an activity called Eidolon Hunts, right? So that's why I've got 2 different vaults, because there's actually a necessity to use 2 different vaults in an Eidolon Hunt, both running different builds. That's how versatile the frame is. So he can speed himself up. He's like really, really, really quick, right? So it's his speed ability. That's literally what it's called. You speed yourself up. He's got his first ability, Shock, which you can turn into your damage buff, which is going to give you additional electric damage. You've got your Shield, which if you shoot through it, you get bonus crit damage and electric damage. And then your fourth ability, which I need to swap to a different what's it called for, a config, is actually a crowd control and damage dealing ability in one, right? So AoE damage dealing if you have enough range, of course. So super versatile frame, crazy awesome. You can pick him up from the Tenno Lab as well as Banshee. And finally, last but definitely not least, a fan favorite that I don't personally like, but everybody seems to like, is a Wukong. So again, this is Wukong Prime. Doesn't really make that much difference, but he can turn himself into a cloud, and you can just kind of go through, you know, any mission in the game just as a cloud, not take any damage. Go super fast, so really good for like the spy missions and whatnot. You can use Defy, which is an ability which is just going to keep you alive, and you know, it's awesome. You can give yourself a little clone, which is pretty cool. A twin, which is going to go around and deal damage, and then you can hit enemies with a big stick, right? You get additional armor and whatnot. He's a pretty nice frame. I don't like him too much, but a lot of people really enjoy this frame for the simple fact that he just makes a lot of missions really easy and really fast, right? I prefer the likes of Nezha, for example, because of the knockdown immunity, maybe even Nova because of the slow and whatnot. But Wukong is definitely a good choice as well, and he's pretty easy to pick up. You get him from the Tenno Lab as well as Nezha, Banshee, and Vault. So that is pretty much it for the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, go ahead, hit that like button below, subscribe for more Warframe content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.